So thank you so much, Eddie, for joining me. I'm so excited to chat with you. You are a case study in the book and a really exciting case study. Your brand is so unique, and I'm so glad that you conceptualized it. And I know you put so much thought into it. So I thought we could start there. Tell me a little bit about your background, your brand, what decisions you made around it, how it all came to be.
Yeah, so I mean, first I want to say, thank you for including me in your book. I'm really excited to check it out and read it. With the Sabor y Soul brand, I mean, I think that was something that really came together when I took your class, the personal branding class, but it was a lot of these little moments, that were slowly building up. Um, something that a lot of people don't really know about me, at least up here in Sacramento, is that I'm originally from Southern California. I'm from San Bernardino. And if you know San Bernardino, it's not always the best place, I think for a while it was one of the worst cities in the country to live in, but it is my home. That's where I was born and raised. And I feel like a lot of the experiences I went through when I was down there, were things that I at the time I didn't really know were a little different in some ways that some of the other people of my age and everything were kind of going through. And it really wasn't until I got to up here to started grad school in the MBA program and everything that I started to realize that I was in a unique position to be able to share some of my stories. Um, Mainly through the blog, but I've always been an artistic person. I love photography, and one of the newest passions I have is cooking. Am I good? No, but I keep trying. But I noticed being up here, it was a way to connect back to my roots back home, to also share again that story of my community, and also probably more importantly is show some vulnerability as well, and kind of letting people know that. Uh, this blog and the work that I do and the art that I create is there to kind of show that vulnerability myself and hopefully inspire others to also be vulnerable and be able to share their stories, whether it's a happy story or something a little more sad, but still having that space, really in that community of being, at least for myself, first generation Hispanic, being in a completely new place and especially now that I'm in my 30s, kind of going through a lot of experiences for the first time and still trying to navigate a lot of that. So I think that was like a lot of the inspiration for this blog and now kind of just putting it all together. Thanks again to the personal branding class.
Tell me kind of about common assumptions and how you kind of approach that a little bit differently, right? What were the common assumptions that drove the formation of your brand? And then, how do you hope to overcome with your approach?
Common assumptions of being a first generation, of
Hmm.
being a Hispanic male, mainly around like being in the kitchen and again being vulnerable, things that even in my own family and in my own friend groups back home, I didn't really see, right? And at that time I thought that was fine. And it wasn't until I came up here and kind of was on my own and had to rediscover myself in a lot of ways and kind of being open um to a lot of these new ideas that once I was kind of going through it, I felt it was okay to be able to share my stories and my vulnerabilities and to kind of go against what I was taught, right? Because again, in my community back home, I was kind of taught that the man isn't necessarily in the kitchen, right? And that's something that I really enjoyed cooking. It was a lot of fun. And same with being able to share some difficulties that you're going through, especially when it comes to like mental health. I feel like not just as a Hispanic man, but also as just a first generation,
Yeah.
um, it's a lot of like you just have to push through, whatever difficulties you're going through. And, as long as you find a good job at the end or you're, financially stable, then that's fine. It was all worth it. But kind of going through it and realizing that there's just so much that happens and not everyone's going to be okay. Not every day is going to be a good day. I found that being comfortable and sharing that and putting myself out there, has been really helpful in again creating that community. And one thing that I found really, impactful was that the more I wrote about these stories, the more people actually reached out to me saying like, "Oh, I get what you're saying. I just didn't know how to say it myself." And that's
Yes.
been really inspirational, right? To know that I'm doing something that's against the norm, of my culture, of where I'm from, but it really is impacting people in what seems to be a positive way. So I think that's really inspirational for me and something that keeps me going.
Yeah, and you don't just say it, you show it to people, right? You show them, you take them along, they learn from you, which I think is so cool. You serve people so well. You don't just say it's okay to do this. You show them yourself doing it and how to do it, which is to me such a gift. Tell me a little bit about, can you tell me that story of Eddie Monix?
Yeah, so Eddie Monix, I think it's a pretty funny story now when I think about it. It was something where, growing up, I was always going to schools where I was definitely the minority, being Hispanic.
Hmm.
And it really wasn't until maybe like late middle school and kind of going to high school that it was brought up to my attention basically that I was different, right? Being Mexican and it wasn't necessarily a good thing. At least that's the way it was presented to me. I felt a little bit of shame and almost like wanting to hide, basically who I was and my heritage and everything. So I think as a way to try to kind of hide myself and really not be the, Mexican define me, who I was, I
Hmm.
decided to kind of create a new name for myself, right? And I think I told you that around that time when I was like in high school, I was watching the movie Semi-Pro, and
Hmm.
one of the characters there, his name was Eddie Monix, and I just liked the way it sounded. My name's already Eddie. Adding Monix sounded pretty cool and very, I don't want to say generic, but maybe more neutral, right?
Hmm.
And so I kind of adopted that early on, just kind of putting on my Instagram handle and everything, and kind of forming an identity that way. What was interesting was that as I got older and kind of going through college and everything, people started to know me as Eddie Monix and not as Eddie Ramirez. And then I eventually used it for my photography services. And then
Hmm.
when I was DJing in SoCal, and it really grew into a thing, just people knowing me as Eddie Monix. But really, it wasn't until more recently that I kind of like thought more about it. Like, why am I Eddie Monix? Like, why did that stick? It's a reminder a little bit of a time when I was a little bit ashamed of who I was. It also allowed me to, again, create something for myself, create my own
Hmm.
brand in a way, before I even knew that was a thing. That again wasn't tied to my heritage and all that. But
Yeah.
now that I'm older, I'm hoping to kind of tie that back together, right? That's kind of how this whole brand started of Sabor y Soul is kind of saying, well, let me tie back to my roots, in some way that I can and kind of losing some of that shame that I think I had for no reason really. That's why, I'm trying to present more of like cooking and then hopefully pretty soon I'll write my next blog post on my trip to Mexico City, which was big on reconnecting with that part of my history, that part of my family as well. So that's kind of how the Eddie Monix kind of story unfolded, and it's something where I think Leticia was telling me like, "Are you gonna change it?" But I feel like it's a part of me now. Eddie Monix is a part of me, and I'd like to continue that moving forward.
And I love how it starts with adversity and it ends up being a lesson in empowerment. I love how you frame the story and use it again as part of your brand to help folks that may be struggling with similar things. And since you are the chapter in the book about how do you figure out, if you're not calling your brand your surname, which some people don't, right? How do you figure out what to call your brand? How do you figure out that logo, right? Talk me through a little bit of how did you arrive at Sabor y Soul and your logo. I love the interesting components you have in it. Talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I know I might have to say it because she's gonna kill me if I don't, but Leticia was a big part of the logo. Um, kind of talking to her about it. I remember we were just sitting down one night and I was trying to figure out like what really encompasses who I am and kind of that mood that I want to bring up, right? And one thing that was very big for me was like color, for example,
Hmm.
where I wanted to be more of like a neutral color, more like earthy tones if I could. And then I've always been a very simple, minimalistic person. Just I don't like too much chaos going around, especially when it comes to logos. And I think as I was trying to think of, what will really combine my interests of like photography, cooking, and just uh, sharing stories and everything, slowly it came about that Sabor y Soul was going to be the perfect way to kind of just grab all of that into one piece. And to the logo it does have that like pot as part of the O for sabor, and then the camera for the O and soul, which there's two things that are very important to me. And I hope that, when people look at this logo, it's one thing that they can resonate where it's very simple, it's made to be very welcoming to people, and something that they would want to continue to explore, right? And I didn't necessarily want it to tie it to just one specific thing, like only photography or only cooking or only sharing stories. I wanted to just make sure it had all of that together. And I was actually very surprised by how easy it kind of came about to just put it all together. Because I always pictured, creating logos was this big thing. I would have to get like some sort of marketing team to do this for me and graphic designers and all that. But I felt like going through tools like Canva and others, just really made it so much easier to create it now. And I was like, okay, I guess I can create a logo and something that sticks, right? Because there are people who can now see this logo and they know it's for my brand, and even people who don't necessarily know me, they'll see this logo and see like, oh, this is actually a pretty nice story, and I'll see like the clicks on the blogs and on the Instagram posts that it's attracting people. So. It's
Yeah.
very nice how it all came about. I'm actually very happy about it, very proud about it. But again, credit to Leticia for helping me brainstorm that one too.
You did bring it together so well, and it's amazing how many people, and I think there's such a great opportunity in this, we can package ourselves. We think about how we show up in person every day, every week, right? And online, we don't put as much thought. But even if it's just a simple, like cursive type logo of a name or something, doing that, having that website, all of that, it formalizes the brand so much. And it's almost inspiring to the brand builder themselves,
Yeah.
creating that authority, that credibility. And you do it so well. And I think it has this ripple effect. And one thing I was wondering about is, we always talk about getting specific, right, with the personal brand. And I think you took many ideas and tied them in the specificity of it's okay to do this, even if you are a Hispanic male, right? And then you tied so much culture into that. And then your audience is specific, but then you have so many secondary audiences, right? So I think you so masterfully figured out, okay, I have these multidisciplinary interests here. They're all artistic. They all kind of are on the periphery of what I've always been told I should be. And you just did such a great job. It's so memorable. And I think you give people a lot of permission to be who they are. And I think it helps in your work too. Can you talk to me a little bit about that?
Yeah, so what I do obviously for work is working outreach for university admissions for Davis, um, and to be honest, it's one thing where I felt like I always was able to connect with students, mainly because I was a transfer student myself, and whenever I would go to community colleges, which is a majority of the students I talk to, it's easy to relate in that way. By having this blog and just this freedom I feel, right, to express myself, that whenever I talk to a student or a family, or sometimes it's not community college, but high school students as well and their families, it it almost I understand them a little bit better, right, than I did before.
Hmm.
And I always make sure that for these students that they are aware that they can share their stories with me. And I always remember back to a moment when I went back to SoCal to do some outreach work down there. And I went back to my high school and talking to some of the students there. I I was like, I was in your shoes, like
Hmm.
at this point, 10, 15 years ago, but I was in your shoes at some point. I understand, what you're going through, but sadly, I think a lot of the times when I talk to these students, they're going through a lot of issues, a lot of things. They just don't know how to express themselves. I'm able to connect with these students a lot better because I let them know that it's okay to share these stories, right? In some cases,
Hmm.
they'll share it through their, application essays, so on and so
Yeah.
forth. But I tell them, if we set up an appointment and you're able to share with me some of these struggles that you're going through, then I know how to help you out as well when I'm advising for college admissions and all these things. I know to tell you that maybe this pathway is better for you than this other one that we were thinking of, or whatever, is going on. Um, and I hope that as I'm speaking to these students, at least they can take away that, it's okay to be open. It's okay to talk to people about the issues that they may be going on. And probably more importantly, it's okay to ask for help. Is I realize that a lot of people are sometimes afraid to do so or don't know how to. And that's something I've touched on through some of my blog posts that, I need help and I am asking people sometimes for help, and it's okay to do so. So that's really how it's helped me during my job as well, as kind of being open with these students and having them be open with me as well. It just builds a much better connection and they trust me a lot more for it too.
I love how it touches so many aspects of your life and your profession and other people's lives and how they move about professionally and personally. When you look ahead in 5 to 10 years, what impact do you hope your work will have?
I'm hopeful that it will still be around, like the blog will still be around. If not, maybe Eddie Monix will still be around as its own little brand. But I do hope that I at least made an impact in at least one person's life, and I'm happy that even now, by sharing my stories and kind of writing more about this, I've had family members reach out to me. I have had friends reach out to me, people that they didn't know that these were some of the struggles that I was going through, or some of the things that I was looking to do with a blog. Um, and they share their stories with me too, and I think that's been, again, very inspiring to continue to do this type of work. But even for myself, I see it as another form of therapy, being able to write, being able to cook, and then being able to go and do some photography and kind of putting it all together. And I've already had people reach out saying, can they also do some collaboration posts and everything, whether it's through like the writing or through the photography. And that's really is my goal, right? Provide that space for people, and a bit of a platform as well. So hopefully in 5 to 10 years it's still going on strong, and probably even if it's just for myself just to write, I think I'd be happy with that too.
Thank you so much for stepping out there and doing this for the world. I think sometimes when we hesitate, right? Like think of all the gifts that would have been held back. So thanks for not. Thanks for doing it.
Yeah,
And thank
of
you so
course.
much for your time. Is there anything that I left out that you want to touch on?
The only thing is, again, thank you for this, and I hope that by people, reading your book and kind of going through some of these other blogs and other brands, that they realize that, they have a lot of power. They are experts in their own lives and their own brands and their own vision, and that's something that is definitely worth sharing out there and putting out to the world, because it's definitely going to help someone out too. So, yeah,
Yes, absolutely. Yep. And then it kind of it gives you a credibility boost as well. It's almost like the side effect of helping people is that self boost. So thank you
of
so much. Thank you. And we will definitely be in touch.
course. Thank you, Vanessa.